She spoke 9 languages, but for 13 years, no one even bothered to ask her name. A janitor, working in the middle of the night, would change an entire corporate culture all with a single, perfectly timed sentence. At the headquarters of Hallberg International in Fort Worth, Texas, people walked past her every day without a second glance. It wasn't out of malice. It was just... They were used to looking right through the people holding mops, as if they were part of the walls, like the sound of an elevator, present, but completely unheard. Denise Atwater had worked the night shift for over a decade, had never been to the executive offices, never been invited to a meeting, never been asked by anyone, "What do you think?" But one Monday morning, all because a Chinese man was lost in the lobby, everything changed. She guided him in Mandarin, her voice low, steady, and fluent. A flustered delivery manager, she spoke to him in Spanish, then switched to French for a supplier who had sent the wrong shipment. 3 languages, 3 situations, in less than 5 minutes. And someone was watching. Jonathan Kellerman, the company's CEO, was walking from the parking garage to the 18th floor when he stopped short. He'd lived in Shanghai. He knew Mandarin when he heard it. But what froze him in his tracks wasn't the language. It was the person speaking it, a woman in a janitor's uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes focused, and her voice filled with a confidence that was unapologetic, unflinching, unasking of permission. He had spent millions on international translation services, on training staff, on global expansion, and the person with the most brilliant linguistic skills was mopping the floor just 2 stories below his office. He walked over, not to command, not to test, but to ask, "That was Mandarin, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir." "And Spanish, French?" "I speak all 3, and 6 more." There wasn't a hint of a brag in her voice, just a fact, as straight and clean as the grout line in the marble floor. What would you do if you discovered your silent janitor was a linguistic genius? Would you open the door or keep it shut because of hiring protocol? In that moment, Jonathan Kellerman wasn't just standing before a janitor. He was standing before his own conscience and a chance to fix the way an entire system sees people. But he had no idea what was waiting for them both behind those elevator doors. Not just a conversation, not just an offer, but an irreversible chain reaction that would shake every floor of Hallberg International. And it was just beginning. The elevator slid silently up to the 18th floor, a world of polished hardwood, warm, honey-colored light, and the scent of citrus mixed with expensive leather. A world away from the smell of bleach downstairs. Denise stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to keep her breathing even. Jonathan Kellerman glanced over at her. He recognized her hesitation wasn't from fear, but from being so used to being ignored. She was no stranger to injustice, but she was unaccustomed to being heard. "How long have you worked here?" he asked softly. "Sir, 13 years, she replied, her eyes fixed on the elevator's control panel. "And you've never been invited to this floor?" She let out a soft laugh, not a happy one, but a bitter, honest sound. "I've never been invited to any floor besides the maintenance level." The doors chimed open with a ding, Denise stepped out first, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the gleaming hardwood. The CEO's assistant's eyes flashed with surprise, seeing her walking beside her boss. No one offered an explanation, and Kellerman didn't feel one was necessary. They entered the CEO's office, 4 glass walls overlooking the entire city. Denise paused for half a second, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she was trying to determine, was this a beautiful dream or just another test? "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. She sat down slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes briefly scanned the world map behind him, dotted with colored pins, symbols of all the places where he'd expanded the company. But not one of them marked what was happening right here at headquarters. He sat across from her, leaning forward slightly. "Denise, I'll be frank. I didn't expect to be having this conversation today." She gave a slight nod. Her face was expressionless, as if she had been hearing meaningless opening lines her entire life. "But you just spoke 3 languages as if you were flipping a switch. I need to understand, how does someone like you end up mopping floors here?" A beat of silence. Denise looked out the window, then turned back. Her gaze was gentle, not evasive, not resentful, just the look of someone who was used to swallowing the world whole without demanding an apology. "Do you have time for the truth?" He nodded. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't want to know." She rubbed her hands together, not because she was cold, but as if warming up old memories before letting them out. "I was born in Toledo, Ohio. My father was a welder. My mother was a nurse's aide. They didn't have much, but they always told me education is the way out of poverty. I believed them. I studied hard, got a full scholarship, went to Kent State, majored in linguistics." She paused for a beat, taking a deep breath. "But while I was working on my master's thesis, my mother got sick. I dropped out to go home and care for her. 6 months later, my father died of a stroke. My world collapsed." Kellerman said nothing. He just listened, as if her every word was patching a hole inside him he never knew he had. "Then I had my daughter. No money, no one by my side. I did every job you can think of: grocery stores, nursing homes, night markets, babysitting. Then someone told me about a night cleaning shift here. It was late enough for me to pick up my daughter from school and pay the electric bill." She squeezed her hands gently, but her voice remained steady. "But I never stopped learning. I borrowed books from the public library, listened to foreign radio stations, read newspapers in French, German, and Spanish. Every night after my shift, I'd sit in the back of the logistics area and read dictionaries." She lifted her head. "Because of all the things I'd ever done, learning languages was the only thing that made me feel like I still existed." That sentence landed, quiet but heavier than any elevator ding or polished floor. Kellerman sat in silence for a long moment. Then he asked, "Did you ever think about doing something else?" Denise gave a slight shrug. "Of course, but it's hard to dream when you can't even make rent." In that moment, he knew the woman before him didn't need to be saved. She needed to be seen. Denise didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to embellish her story with flashy words. Her story went straight to the heart. No detours, no cover-ups. Actually, I used to think I'd be a professor, teach classes on cross-cultural linguistics. I love how words can bend perception, how every language hides a piece of its speaker's soul. But life doesn't always let you choose. She raised her eyes, looking directly at the CEO for the first time, without flinching. I had 2 part-time jobs, a 6-year-old daughter, and no one to back me up. Back then, everything important revolved around one thing: survival. Kellerman nodded slowly, his eyes beginning to fill with empathy, but Denise kept her distance. She was used to disguised pity, and she didn't need it. Sometimes I'd ask myself, where did I go wrong? I have an education. I have a passion. I work tirelessly. But I didn't have an open door. A tense silence stretched between them. Denise let out a soft breath, then continued. Every night, after cleaning the 7th floor restrooms, I'd stand in front of the glass in the hallway, and I'd see my reflection inside this magnificent building. But it was still me, standing there, holding a mop. I saw myself as transparent, a simple image, but heartbreakingly painful. There was a time I wanted to quit, but then my daughter said, "Mommy, you know more things than my teacher." That sentence kept me going, not out of pride, but because I didn't want her to learn how to give up just because she wasn't recognized. She slowly pulled a worn piece of paper from her pocket, folded in 4, slightly wrinkled. "This is a list of the languages I've studied. I wrote it when I was 19. I keep it with me like people keep a good luck charm, to remind myself I have value, even if no one sees it." Kellerman took the piece of paper, silently unfolding it. The writing, in faded blue ink, read Mandarin, Espagnol, Français, Portuguese, Deutsch, Al-Arabiya, Italiano, Kiswahili, Latin, reading only, no signature, no date, just sweat and nameless years. "You learned all of this without a teacher. There was no money to hire one, but I had my ears, my eyes, and I had patience." She paused for a moment, then spoke slowly. "You know, the hardest part isn't being ignored. It's knowing you can do more, but no one wants to find out." That statement was like a direct blow to the heart of the hiring system, the corporate hierarchy, and the elevators that only opened for people with degrees, not for hearts and persistence. Kellerman leaned back in his chair, pressing his lips together. He had led global meetings, signed dozens of international deals, and was seen as a symbol of self-made success. But today, he felt small before a woman who cleaned floors. "Do you know you're a miracle?" he asked, his voice now hoarse. Denise smiled faintly. "I know I'm a survivor. As for being a miracle, no one's ever given me the chance to prove it." He placed the piece of paper back in her hand, his expression serious. "Perhaps it's time to change that." Denise looked up, squinting slightly, not because of the sun, but because hope, when starved for too long, often makes a person wary. That afternoon, as the clock struck 3:45, Kellerman unexpectedly left the executive floor. He went straight down to the service basement, where the temperature was always a few degrees hotter. There was no background music, no signature fragrance, only the smell of cleaning chemicals and the sound of metal carts hitting the walls. He walked past the maintenance crews, the janitor's break room, the bottled water storage, and stopped in front of the janitorial supply closet. Denise was standing on a stool, reorganizing a stack of microfiber cloths, her movements as neat and efficient as a professional warehouse coordinator. "Sorry to bother you again," he said, and she turned with a slight start. You really came down here?" Denise asked, half in shock, half on guard. Kellerman smiled gently. "I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation, and I need to ask you for a favor." Denise tilted her head. "What kind of favor, sir?" "We have a meeting with our partners from the Sao Paulo office. Their interpreter cancelled at the last minute due to a health issue. I don't have time to hire a replacement. Can you help?" Denise froze. It was only for a few seconds, but it was long enough for him to see the battle in her eyes between "Am I being used?" and "Is this a real opportunity?" "Portuguese?" she asked. "Yes." He nodded. She took a breath, then nodded back. "In that case, yes." Just 10 minutes later, they walked into conference room 4C. 4 Brazilian executives were scrolling through their phones, their faces etched with clear frustration. One had even stood up to call an emergency language service. Denise entered quietly, still wearing her reddish-brown janitor's uniform, her hair in a neat bun, with no tablet, no lanyard, no name badge. She smiled, gave a slight bow, and began to speak in Portuguese. Her accent was so round, smooth, and authentic that all 4 men looked up as if they'd received a mild electric shock. In just a few minutes, the tense atmosphere in the room dissolved. The executives began to ask deep questions, exchange plans in their native tongue, their gestures becoming more open. Someone even made a joke, and Denise didn't just understand it. She responded with a play on words that made the whole room laugh. Kellerman sat silently in the back, not understanding all the content, but he saw the effect clearly. It wasn't translation efficiency, it was connection. The kind of thing no contract could buy. After 20 minutes, the meeting concluded. One of the executives shook Kellerman's hand, then asked, "Is she a permanent employee?" "We haven't worked with anyone that good all year." Kellerman glanced at Denise, who was now collecting used water glasses from the table as if she hadn't just been the center of attention. Then he smiled. "She's always been right here. We just never looked closely enough." On the way out to the hallway, he walked beside her. "Have you ever worked as a professional interpreter before?" he asked. She shook her head. "Only helped out at hospitals, government offices. I don't have any certifications. Never had the time or money to get formally trained. I had to be home with my daughter." "How is your daughter now?" "She's 26, a nurse in Tempe, Arizona, paid her own tuition, passed her nursing boards all on her own. She's stubborn, like her mother." They both broke into a laugh, not too loud, but loud enough for the boss janitor distance to vanish in the space of a single footstep. They went down to the service level, where Denise had to finish her shift. But before she went back to work, she turned to him. I didn't do anything special today. Kellerman stopped, looking at her for a long moment. That's not how I see it. Denise didn't reply. She just gave a very small smile. Not a smile of victory, but the smile of someone being recognized for the first time after a long, exhausting journey. The next morning, just as Denise finished mopping the East Wing corridor, she was called up to the executive floor again. This time, it wasn't a call on the internal phone, but a gentle tap on the shoulder from her supervisor, accompanied by a strange nod. "Mr. Kellerman wants to see you," Ron said, his tone unclear if it was anxious or just confused. Denise paused. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the abnormality of being called by name for 2 consecutive days. For 13 years, no one had ever paid attention to the night shift. Now, she was the only one being invited to the 18th floor. Twice, she washed her hands, fixed her hair, and stepped into the elevator. The feeling was different this time. On her way, every eye in the company began to follow her, no longer looking through her, but with quick glances, with whispers down the hallway. A receptionist even gave a slight smile, as if she knew something Denise didn't. When Denise walked into the CEO's office, Kellerman was standing near the window, a cup of black coffee in his hand, looking out at the city beyond. The early light traced his hair in a silver outline. "You're here," he said, without turning around. She stood still. "Is something wrong, sir?" He turned, placed his cup on a coaster, and looked directly at her. "I've been thinking a lot since yesterday, about overlooked talent, about the people who never get a chance, just because no one bothers to take a second look." She remained silent, not out of emotion, but out of caution. Denise had seen promising words turn to dust too many times, but this time, something in his voice made her hold her ground. This company needs a new role, someone who doesn't just speak languages, but understands cultures, who doesn't just read words, but reads situations. I want to create a position called International Cultural Liaison, and the first person to hold it will be you. She blinked. What? Kellerman took a step closer. You're the right person. You're more than right. You've already proven it without anyone asking you to, and now I want to give you an official seat at the table. Denise swallowed hard. She didn't know whether to be happy, suspicious, or cry. "Sir, I don't have a college degree, no certifications. I've never worked in an office." "You have something more valuable," he replied. "Life experience, real-world skills, a resilient heart, and a gift for connection that can't be taught." "But..." "No buts. People will say I don't deserve it. People will always say something. What matters is what we believe." She fell silent. Her gaze wavered. "What about a uniform? I don't have office-style clothes." "HR will send you a clothing allowance, a blazer, new shoes, a laptop bag, small things, but they fit the new role." Denise let out a soft laugh, not a mocking one, but a strange reaction, her mind reeling with a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I'm trying to." She walked closer to the window, looking down below, to the place where she used to push her cleaning cart every night. The maintenance level, the hallways, the break room, they all appeared like fragments of an old life. "What about my night shift?" she asked. "Who's going to clean floors 6 and 7? Kellerman squinted, a small smile playing on his lips. "We'll find someone, but no one can replace you." The room fell silent. Denise placed her hand on the desk in front of her, feeling the cool of the glass, then looked at him. "This isn't pity, is it?" "No," he answered instantly. "This is what's right, and it's long overdue, if you ask me." She lifted her head. Her eyes were slightly red, but no tears fell. She had spent too many years crying in silence. Right now, she didn't want to cry. She wanted to walk forward. "Okay," she said. "Then, let's see what I can do." Kellerman extended his hand. Denise shook it. Not a polite, formal handshake. It was a commitment. That handshake was an agreement without a signature, but it would shake an entire system that had grown accustomed to silence. The news spread faster than an email. By midweek, it was no longer a rumor, it was a tangible reality. With the name Denise Atwater printed on a shiny new nameplate outside an office on the 12th floor, Denise Atwater, International Cultural Liaison. And the entire company seemed not to know how to react. Some people smiled as she walked by, nodding politely, whispering to each other behind her back. "Is that really the one who speaks 9 languages? I heard the CEO promoted her himself. Maybe she used to work for the CIA." But behind those whispers was another current, quieter, colder. Envy, skepticism, and resentment began to seep through every cubicle, every meeting room, and every hidden Slack channel. In the 8th floor marketing department, 2 young assistants whispered over their salads. She was a janitor, right? Just last week she was cleaning the 6th floor restrooms. "I have a master's in international business. Been waiting 2 years for a promotion." This has to be some kind of PR stunt by Kellerman. It's so obvious. In the legal department, someone tapped their desk repeatedly while reading the appointment email. No degree, no certifications, no management experience. Since when is that the criteria for a senior position? Those words were never spoken to her face, but Denise heard them, not with her ears, but with their eyes, with the way doors closed as she approached, the way lunch conversations paused in mid-sentence when she walked by. She didn't react. She just kept walking. But deep inside, she felt like she was standing in a familiar hallway again. Not a hallway she had to clean, but a hallway of doubt. She entered her first office, a simple space, a dark wood desk, a snake plant in the corner, a brand new laptop she hadn't yet dared to touch. The room was strangely quiet. No more sound of a sweeping broom, no squeak of shoes on a stone floor, just the sound of a heartbeat from someone used to standing in the background, who was now standing in the spotlight of scrutiny. That afternoon, HR finalized her onboarding paperwork. Denise received a new ID badge, a new email address, even a small gift bag with the company logo embroidered in silver thread. When they were about to collect her old uniform, she hesitated. "Can I keep the uniform not to wear? Just to remember?" They looked at her for a moment, then nodded. A moment later, she met Victor, the executive director of international operations. A thin man, his eyes as cold as steel, a clipboard always at the ready. He walked in without knocking. No handshake. He didn't sit. His voice was like a velvet-wrapped blade. "You're the new person in the new role." "So I've heard," Denise replied, her eyes unblinking. "Do you have any experience in a corporate environment?" "Only from the outside looking in," she said with a faint smile. "I have 3 active fires, a contract translation from Italy, a document discrepancy from Dubai, and a stalled negotiation with our Brazilian partners. I need an internal assessment by the end of today. Can you handle it?" Denise stood up. Her voice was calm, steady. "I'll need a few hours to review the documents. But yes, I can do it." Victor narrowed his eyes, placed a thick stack of documents on her desk, and turned to leave. Not a word of good luck, not a flicker of trust. When Kellerman stopped by at the end of the day, he found Denise still sitting there, head bowed over a dense contract, marking up grammatical errors in an Arabic translation with a red pen. "How was the first day?" he asked. Denise looked up, a slight smirk on her lips. "I've worked the night shift at a gas station. This isn't the worst of it. Victor giving you a hard time. He doesn't scare me. I didn't think he would." He smiled. Then he asked quietly, "Why didn't you say no? You could have just taken a bonus. Gone home. No fuss." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Because my whole life, I've only had a voice in the shadows. Now, I want to see what happens when someone is willing to listen." Kellerman nodded. The answer needed no further explanation. After he left, Denise stood up and looked around the room one more time. Her hand gently touched the new nameplate hanging outside her door, not for confirmation, but to remind herself value doesn't come from a warm welcome, but from how you keep walking, even when no one is clapping. On Monday morning, Denise walked into her 12th floor office wearing a simple, light beige suit, not too flashy, not too ornate. Her hair was still tied back neatly, just as it was during her night shifts, and her low-heeled grey shoes were clean but showed a few small scuffs. She wasn't trying to become someone else. She was just stepping into a new role on her own 2 feet. The office door opened to a desk that was just as she'd left it, the morning light streaming across the brown wood, creating a line between the old day and the new. Less than 30 minutes later, Victor, the director of international operations, returned. He knocked twice, didn't wait for an invitation, and pushed the door open. The familiar clipboard was in his hand, his expression unchanged. "I want to see your analysis of the 3 international situations I left you. Have you had time to do it?" Denise stood up and handed him 3 neatly printed folders. Blue ink underlined the errors. Detailed notes in the margins explained each linguistic discrepancy. and each was accompanied by a summary in French, Arabic, and English. Victor took them without a word. He flipped through a few pages, then stopped. "You corrected the contract from Dubai?" "Yes." The translation of clause 5. 3 was incorrect, causing our partner to misunderstand the ownership rights of the product post-deployment. And the Brazilian agreement. I called our partner to verify. They confirmed the current phrasing obscured technical responsibilities, which could have affected the quality of the contract. Victor said nothing, but his eyebrows relaxed slightly. He gently placed the documents back on her desk. Then, without a goodbye, he turned and walked away. Not a word of praise, not a smile. But Denise knew very well with people like him. Silence is a form of acknowledgement. That afternoon, Kellerman made a surprise visit to her office. He was still holding his familiar cup of coffee. "Survived the first day, have you?" Denise smiled faintly, her eyes still fixed on the computer screen. "I once worked in a temporary morgue during the pandemic. This is a spa day compared to that." He chuckled, then leaned against the doorframe. "Did Victor say anything?" "No, but he didn't throw the documents in the trash. I'll take that as a hello." They looked at each other, a comfortable silence between them, the kind that can only exist between people who have both been underestimated. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Why did you agree to this role instead of just taking a bonus and going back to the night shift?" Denise sat up straight. Her expression was serious. "Because I was tired of being silently walked past. I don't need the whole world to see me, just one person. And if you were that person, then I was going to take it as a sign." Kellerman nodded, then said quietly, like a confession, "I see myself in you." Denise raised an eyebrow. "You used to be a janitor." He laughed. "No, but I was the kid who got rejected from a scholarship list just because my father's name wasn't in the school board's directory. I know what it feels like to be considered out of place. Trust me." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Denise said softly, "I'm worried. Not about the work, but about how other people see me." "You should be, but don't let it lead you. Every look is a distorted mirror. Your job is not to let them warp your own reflection." Denise pressed her lips together. She gave a slight nod. That day, before leaving the office, she walked past the main conference room, where a few mid-level employees were discussing market expansion into North Africa. They didn't see her standing outside, but she heard them. "Who's handling the Arabic translation for this Atwater? Is she any good?" A beat of silence. Then a reply. "She's better than the IT department's translation software." Denise kept walking, without turning back. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She just needed to keep doing what was right, and to quietly change every corner of a system that had gone unheard for far too long. Thursday afternoon. Denise had just finished a meeting with the legal department when she received a short text message. 17th floor, meeting room C, 4:00 p.m, Eleanor Craig. No greeting, no reason, but that name alone was enough to make her heart sink. Eleanor Craig, a veteran member of Halberg International's board of directors, the woman who had shaped their global strategy since the 90s, notorious for her icy demeanor, her razor-sharp words, and a habit of not trusting anyone without an Ivy League degree and 3 decades of experience. Denise adjusted her collar. For the first time in her life, she was going to the 17th floor, where the board held its private meetings, where major decisions were made that the janitorial staff would never know about. The room was small, cold, with a dark wood table and walls adorned with portraits of former chairmen. Eleanor was already seated, a file placed neatly in front of her. She wore a light grey suit, thin, gold-rimmed glasses, and a piercing gaze. "Please, have a seat," Eleanor said without looking up. Denise sat. Her hands weren't shaking, but they clenched slightly in her lap. Eleanor tapped her pen on the table twice, then opened the file. "According to your file, you do not have a completed college degree, have never worked in a corporate environment, have no management certifications, and no formal experience handling international contracts." Denise nodded. "Correct. You were a night shift janitor just 3 weeks ago." "Yes." Eleanor looked up, lacing her fingers together. Her voice was as sharp as a blade. "Help me understand, Ms. Atwater. How does someone like you end up in charge of international relations for a multinational corporation?" Denise sat up straight, not tense, not evasive. She had been preparing her whole life for this moment, even if she didn't know what it would look like. "I speak 9 languages. I can read and understand 5 writing systems. I have corrected 3 flawed contracts, saved a deal that was stalled for 3 months, and reconnected with our Brazilian partners, all within my first 5 days." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And you think that's enough?" "No, but I also don't think a Harvard MBA would automatically help someone navigate a misunderstanding in a meeting held in Moroccan Arabic." Eleanor was silent. No smile, no rebuttal. Denise looked her straight in the eye, not with defiance, just with fact. "I'm not here to be a token for your diversity report. I'm here because I've proven I'm useful." A beat of silence. Eleanor closed the file and stood up. "You're a gamble. You know that." Denise stood as well, slowly, gently, but firmly. "I'm used to living on a gamble, Mrs. Craig. I have been since the day I was born." Eleanor looked at her for a long, long time. Then she quietly gathered her file, said nothing more, and left the room. Denise was left standing alone. No applause, no confirmation. But she knew she had not been dismissed. And in that world, not being dismissed was the highest form of acknowledgement. Denise didn't go right back to her office. She walked out of the building and sat down on a wooden bench across the street, where she had a direct view of the gleaming glass facade of the company headquarters. For so many years she had pushed a mop cart inside, never daring to think she would one day be looking at it from the outside, as part of that world. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter. "Mom." Her daughter's voice came through, bright and cheerful. "It's nothing. I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," just needed to hear a familiar voice. They talked for a while about the grocery store, the new dog she adopted, a movie her daughter was excited to see. Nothing big, but the clear laughter of the child she once held in her arms pulled Denise's soul right back into place. She closed her phone and stood up, looked up at the building. "All right," she whispered. "If you want to fight, then I know how to stand my ground." She crossed the street, walked into the building, head held high. That evening, after a long day, Denise didn't go straight home. She walked out of the Hallberg building, not rushing, not looking back, just walking along the sidewalk as if listening to the sound of her own footsteps on each paver, the steps of a person once deemed invisible by an entire system. When she reached the small park a few blocks from headquarters, she stopped. The stone bench under the maple tree was still warm from the sun. Denise sat down, took out her phone, and dialed a single number. "Hello, Mum." Her daughter's voice came through, full of life, completely unaware that on the other end of the line was a woman who had just walked out of the most powerful interrogation of her life. "Yeah, it's me," Denise replied softly. "It's rare for you to call this late. Is something wrong?" Denise looked up at the sky. No stars, just the pale grey of a sleeping city. She took a deep breath, then said, "No, I just wanted to hear your voice for a minute." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a laugh. "What's going on?" "Mum, tough day." Denise smiled faintly. Her voice softened, as if she had found a soft pillow for her mind. "It's just, some people at the company think I'm not good enough for this position. So, what do you think?" "I don't know. I know I understand the work. I know 9 languages. I handle crises better than translation software. But sometimes, the first thing people see is the uniform I used to wear." Her daughter grew quiet for a moment, then spoke softly, as if whispering a truth. "You know what, Mum? When I was little, I used to be embarrassed that you didn't have a desk job. All my friends would brag about their parents working in offices. But then I looked back. No one taught me resilience like you did. No one taught me how to keep going when no one was clapping." Denise bit her lip. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. She had cried enough during those 13 years of mopping floors, enough in quiet break rooms, enough when watching opportunities pass her by. "Mum," her daughter continued, "this isn't about you anymore. It's about so many people like you, waiting for someone to do what's never been done. And you just opened the first door." Denise nodded slowly. On that park bench, she was no longer a temporary employee or the company's one-week phenomenon. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman standing between 2 worlds, one that had once rejected her, and one that was listening for the first time. "Thank you, my stubborn little girl." "You're just as stubborn. Who do you think I got it from?" They both laughed, and that laughter, not loud, not grand, was the thread that kept Denise from falling into the familiar loneliness of a pioneer. After hanging up, Denise sat for a few more minutes. She watched the people passing by, everyone busy, everyone looking like they knew exactly where they were going. And then she stood up, not because she was pushed, but because she was ready to move forward. Returning to the building, she pressed the elevator button without looking down at her feet. She held her head high, her eyes bright. Tomorrow, there would still be people who doubted her, who would test her. But after that phone call, no one could ever break her spirit again. Less than 2 weeks after starting her new role, Denise Atwater was no longer the rumor from the janitorial floor or a one-time phenomenon. She was starting to become a new habit, a strange but welcome habit. People saw her in customer service, helping someone edit an automated response into more polite French. People saw her on the 14th floor in the middle of an emergency meeting, correcting a German translation with just a red pen and 5 minutes of silence. People saw her sitting in the cafeteria, not eating hastily as before, but listening to an intern from India talk about his fear of speaking English with an accent. And people began to seek her out, not because she was the cultural liaison, but because she made people feel seen. One afternoon, an intern named Bao, a shy Vietnamese student who had only been there a week, knocked on her door. "Ms. Denise, can I ask you something? Come in, son. Don't stand out there like you're apologizing for existing." He sat down, flustered. "How did you learn 9 languages? I'm just studying Japanese and I already feel like giving up." Denise tilted her head, her gaze softening. "By repeating it every day, 1 word, 1 sentence, 1 mistake, and then starting over." Bao's eyes widened. "You didn't have a teacher." "No, but I had willpower, and a dictionary so overdue the library stopped trying to get it back." They both laughed. And from that day on, every Tuesday afternoon, the intern would bring his flashcards to ask her about using honorifics in a Japanese workplace. No one asked Denise to do that, but everyone was beginning to understand that was what made her irreplaceable. In meetings, she didn't say much, but whenever she spoke, the room went quiet, not because of her title, but because of her precision. Once, when a contract with a French partner was thought to be finalized, Denise gently pointed to a line. Using the word "garantir" here instead of "assurer" implies that we are providing an unconditional guarantee of compensation. This needs to be changed. The legal team was stunned. A single translated word had nearly cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. From that day on, people started adding a new step to their process. Has Denise looked at this yet? At the end of the month, Kellerman walked into her office, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I'm hearing more good news about you than I am in the quarterly reports." Denise smiled, taking the coffee. "I'm trying to keep things quiet, but it seems like the ripples are starting to spread." "Sometimes you need to make waves," he replied, "as long as it washes away the old stuff." She looked at him. Then she asked, like someone nurturing an idea bigger than herself, "Have you ever thought about internal training for the people who aren't in the system but have talent?" Kellerman raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I think there are still a lot of people like me, overlooked, but with something valuable the system doesn't know how to see." A moment of silence. Then he nodded. "Then help me create that program. Teach them. Give them a chance. What should we call it?" Denise looked out the window. Then she answered softly, "Voice inside." Just 2 weeks later, the Voice Inside program was officially announced internally, offering opportunities for training in communication skills, languages, and mentoring to all non-managerial staff. That meant anyone, from technicians to warehouse employees, had a chance to learn and prove themselves. When the announcement email was sent, Denise sat silently in her office, not with pride, but to remember the silent nights she had endured, and to understand that silence is not a lack of ability, it's just a lack of opportunity to speak. When the Voice Inside program officially launched at the start of the new quarter, only a few dozen people signed up at first, mostly familiar names from the maintenance-level warehouse staff, the repair crew, administrative assistants, security guards. But after just 2 weeks, that number had quadrupled. Not because they hoped to change their lives overnight, but because for the first time in their careers, someone had asked them what they wanted to learn. Denise didn't stand on a stage to introduce the program. She didn't need the spotlight. She chose to sit in the first circle, to learn with them, to share her own experience of learning Swahili from a Kenyan delivery driver. And when people realized she wasn't standing above them, but walking with them, she became the center of it all. Not because of her title, but because of an empathy forged by experience. A few months later, Denise received an invitation to speak at the International Logistics Industry Leadership Conference in Cincinnati. At first, she refused. "I'm not a leader," she told Kellerman. "That's exactly why. They need to hear from you," he replied. Denise stepped up to the podium, not wearing designer clothes, not using a PowerPoint presentation, just a microphone, a white spotlight, and a pair of eyes that had once scrubbed floors under fluorescent lights. And she began, "I used to be a janitor in the same company where I am now a manager. I used to be called by my employee number, have my gaze avoided, and be treated like part of the building's background. But I speak 9 languages. I understand 5 cultures. I've corrected 3 contracts that saved my company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not saying this to impress you. I'm saying this because there are hundreds of people just like me existing in silence." The room was completely still. "I am not a special case. I am the result of a system that finally decided to listen." A man in the audience wiped away a tear. A woman nodded repeatedly. A group of interns in the back row began taking notes as if they were writing history. If you are a leader of any organization, I only ask one thing of you. Don't judge people by the title on their badge. Don't pretend to be diverse. Actually go looking for talent. And the next time you walk past a janitor, try asking how many languages do they speak. A second of silence. Then the entire room rose to their feet. No command needed. The applause was long and sustained. Not for the rhetoric, but for the truth, spoken in a real person's voice. On her way out of the conference, a young man approached her, his eyes red. "My mother cleans rooms in a hotel. She speaks 5 languages. But I used to be ashamed to tell my friends that." Denise placed a hand on his shoulder. "Never be ashamed of where you come from. Only be ashamed if you refuse to see your own value." A few weeks later, The nameplate in front of the Human Resources Training Office at Halberg was replaced. No press conference, no ribbon cutting, just a small, white steel plaque engraved with the words, "The Atwater Room, where voices begin." Denise Atwater didn't need to stand on a stage to be recognized. She didn't need a framed degree on the wall to prove her ability. All she ever needed was for someone to look closely, for someone to ask a question instead of making a judgment, and for a chance to live up to her own value. The day she placed her old janitor ID badge in the drawer of her new office wasn't the day she cast off her past. It was the day she kept it as a legacy, so she would never forget all progress begins with hands that were once ignored. From being a shadow after business hours, she became an inspiration for a new generation, those who had never been invited to speak, never been asked, "What do you think?" and never been allowed to dream beyond the title printed on their uniform. And the most important part, she didn't try to be anyone else. She was just herself clearly, confidently, and unapologetically. In the hallways of the 12th floor, there were still eyes that weren't used to seeing a former janitor walk among them with a manager's title. But now, whenever Denise walked by, there were also young people who would lift their heads to greet her, not because of her rank, but because they saw themselves in her mentoring sessions. She didn't teach from a textbook, but with the living story of her life. She recounted every stumble, every all-night shift, every cold stare that she had to learn not to let it define her. And then, one day, she received an anonymous letter left in her desk drawer. Simple handwriting, no name, no title, just a few lines. "I used to think I was invisible, but today I walked a little taller because I saw you exist. Thank you for not being silent." Denise folded the piece of paper and placed it in the notebook she always carried. And she knew this story was no longer just her own. In a world full of talented people, but few who are heard, Denise Atwater was living proof that genius doesn't always wear a suit, wisdom doesn't need a certificate, and greatness sometimes walks into the room with a mop and a listening heart. If you've ever been overlooked, ever been underestimated, ever been treated as invisible, then remember this: your value isn't in your title, your uniform, or your past. It's in how you keep moving forward every single day, even when no one is clapping, and when it's your turn to be invited into the room. Bring with you all the people who have never been called by name,